On Ethan's birthday, I prepared a gift for him. A bowl of soup and a table full of delicious dishes. I waited for him for a long time, but he never showed up. The food went cold. Feeling uneasy, I contacted one of his friends, only to find out that Ethan was at Cloud Spring Bar. My heart felt desolate as I numbly stood up and headed there. The private room was filled with colorful lights and loud music. Inside, laughter and chatter echoed as people drank and partied. Both men and women surrounded Ethan. It was his crowd. Just as I was about to push the door open, I paused. The door was slightly ajar, and the voices inside became crystal clear. I overheard one of Ethan's close friends joking, "Ethan, you've been pretending to be mute at home every day. You must be dying inside." A wave of coldness spread through my body. Another person chimed in, "That woman, Sarah, is way too headstrong. If it were me, I wouldn't want to live with her either." "Ethan, how long are you planning to keep up this mute act? It's been 4 years already." I had been so worried about Ethan's health that I rushed over, afraid his drinking would harm him. But now, a buzzing filled my ears, drowning out all other sounds. My legs felt weak, and my palms clenched tightly, my nails digging into my skin just to stop myself from making a sound. Then, the man who was supposed to be mute, Ethan, spoke with a cold, emotionless voice. "It's not about pretending to be mute. I just hate everything related to her." A bitter laugh followed. "She's so foolish. 4 years. And she still hasn't realized I've been faking it all along." "Yeah, Ethan." Another voice said, "You were fine a month after the car accident. Sarah didn't notice a thing. Honestly, if it weren't for Hannah, you wouldn't have had to settle for her." "Let's not talk about Sarah tonight," someone else suggested. "It's Ethan's birthday. After all." Through the small gap in the door, I saw Ethan's face darken as he raised his glass and downed it in one go. Strangely, even from this distance, I could see his reddened eyes through the narrow opening. It was ridiculous. For 4 years, I truly believed Ethan was so traumatized that he'd never speak again. But what did it matter if he couldn't talk? I could. I spent those years talking to him every day, trying to make him smile, sharing every little thing that happened. I cooked for him, cared for him, and nursed him back to health, hoping to someday have a place in his heart. 4 years. Long enough to warm even the coldest stone. But there was one name I never dared to mention: Hannah. Ethan's first love. His white moonlight. She was the true owner of this bar and someone I could never hope to compare to. As the door sealed shut again, the voices inside were cut off. I could no longer hear their mocking words. My mind spun, and my vision blurred. I vaguely heard someone call out, "President Sarah," but I couldn't focus. Staggering to the roadside, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. My vision grew hazier, and I realized my low blood sugar was acting up. I popped a piece of candy into my mouth to steady myself. Then, I sent a text to Ethan. "Let's get a divorce." The birthday gift I gave him was a divorce agreement. I didn't ask for anything, only the house we'd lived in for the past 4 years. That moment, I finally understood one thing with painful clarity. I could never compete with a dead person. Not in the past and not in the future. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed. I looked up to see a truck barreling toward me. Behind me, a familiar yet distant voice shouted my name. "Sarah." When I opened my eyes again, I was back 5 years earlier. None of it had happened yet. Ethan's white moonlight was still alive, and he and I had never been married. Joy surged through me as I realized where I was. This was right after my graduation. Ethan's family business was struggling, and Hannah had just gone abroad. In my previous life, I gave up a promising career to join his company and help him rebuild everything, piece by piece. Ethan had always suffered from a severe stomach condition caused by years of overwork and irregular eating habits. I used to cook nutritious meals for him every day, trying different recipes to make sure he ate properly. At social events, where Ethan needed to drink to close deals with those bloated, self-important executives, I worried that the alcohol would worsen his condition. So, I often drank in his place, getting those executives drunk instead. Back then, maybe Ethan was truly moved by my efforts. On one occasion, after I had vomited uncontrollably from drinking too much, he didn't show any disgust. Instead, he made me sobering tea, silently watching over me for a long time before asking, Sarah, is it worth it? Even in my drunken haze, I couldn't forget the way his eyes curved into a smile when he asked that. It's worth it. I replied without hesitation. I like you, Ethan. I like you more than anything. But those fleeting moments of tenderness couldn't withstand the passage of time, or his endless longing for his white moonlight. Hannah. Eventually, I realized that he wasn't worth it. This time, I wouldn't quit my job for him. My phone rang, and it was Ethan. His voice sounded tired. Did your resignation request go through? He asked. I glanced at the resignation letter in my hand. If I hadn't been given this second chance, I would have taken this letter to the CEO's office, submitted it despite their attempts to make me stay, and left my promising position at this Fortune 500 company to join Ethan in a struggling little startup. I would have spent years helping him rebuild, only to witness Hannah's tragic death abroad during a robbery, leaving Ethan devastated and mute. In the end, I had almost coerced him into marrying me. But now, I laughed softly and replied, Ethan, I just texted your precious Hannah about your current situation. She said she'll come back to be with you. Let her take care of you from now on. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could imagine him frowning. His voice turned stern. What do you mean by this? Sarah. I responded clearly. I mean, if anyone wants to quit, it won't be me. If you love resigning so much, go ahead. I'm keeping my job at this Fortune 500 company. Before he could say another word, I hung up. The suffocating weight in my chest lifted slightly. Suddenly, a familiar, deep voice spoke behind me, laughing. You like this job so much? I turned and found myself looking into the eyes of Alexander Lane. His expression held a subtle smile, and the corners of his eyes crinkled with amusement. Seeing him brought back memories. In my past life, many people had looked down on me and Ethan, and many had taken pleasure in my struggles. But when I drank so much at an event that I ended up with a bleeding stomach and still failed to secure the deal, it was Alexander who spoke up for me. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth. The executive I was negotiating with had originally planned to work with Alexander, but it was Alexander who had suggested giving me the contract instead. I had never gotten the chance to thank him in that life, not even before I died. Now, my eyes grew misty. Bowing deeply at a 90-degree angle, I said, Thank you, Mr. Lane. He raised an eyebrow and replied, I don't know why you're thanking me, but there's no need. Save the big gestures for my funeral. I stared at him in silence for a moment before muttering, No wonder you stayed single until I died. You deserve it. From the moment I met Ethan in college, I had always liked him, but even then, everyone knew about his feelings for Hannah. Their relationship was the talk of the school, and people even wrote notes on the dormitory walls, gossiping about their romance. Yet, in the end, they never got together. I thought that might be my chance. After graduation, I lingered around Ethan, hoping to stay close to him. His friends used to tease me every time they saw me, saying, Oh look, Ethan's little shadow is here again. But she's nowhere near as pretty as Hannah. Why don't you bring Hannah around instead? They never treated me like a person, just a joke to laugh at during gatherings. When I got angry, Ethan would frown and say, Don't make a scene. They didn't mean it. Some people seem perfect in everything they do, except they lose all sense of reason when it comes to love. I had lowered my standards and self-respect for him time and time again. But now, I wouldn't anymore. I would stay at Lane Enterprises and continue working. I thought someone as proud as Ethan would never come looking for me again. But that same evening, after work, a familiar car came screeching to a stop in front of me, nearly brushing against my leg. The window rolled down, revealing Ethan's cold, sharp face. His brows were furrowed, and his tone was laced with impatience as he said, Sarah, what's your problem? You just dropped the resignation thing like it's nothing? All that talk about liking me, wanting to help me with the company, was it all a joke? I smiled brightly. Yeah, so what? What are you gonna do? Bite me? With a job this good, I'd have to be crazy to leave and start a business with you. Ethan froze, completely thrown off by my sudden change in demeanor. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. After a few seconds, he let out a bitter laugh. Sarah, playing hard to get doesn't suit you. Just then, a hand rested lightly on my waist, and a cool, composed voice sounded above me. When we get married and you come to our wedding, make sure to bring that hard-to-get attitude along. It was Alexander Lane. Ethan didn't recognize him and immediately shot him a hostile look. Sarah, who is he? I turned to Ethan with a calm expression and asked, and who are you to me? What right do you have to question me? I smiled coldly before adding, Hannah is coming back soon. Isn't she? Since you're so obsessed with her, I think it's best we cut all ties before she returns. I have no interest in staying friends with someone I used to care about. Perhaps I had said something similar to him in the past because Ethan's eyes filled with disbelief. With a mocking tone, he said, Sarah, the last time you said you were done with me, you came crawling back within 3 days. You're pulling the same stunt again, aren't you? I bet you'll come running back to apologize within 7 days. I nodded lightly. Sure. Wait for it. I returned to my peaceful life. And, as I had hoped, Ethan didn't bother me again. I heard through the grapevine that Hannah had returned to the country, and it was Ethan himself who had gone to pick her up. Good. The tragedy from the last life wouldn't happen this time. Hannah wouldn't die, and I wouldn't marry Ethan. 2 days later, Alexander unexpectedly approached me. There's a banquet on Wednesday. Would you mind accompanying me? 10 times your daily salary, paid up front. My eyes lit up, and I nodded eagerly. Only someone as humble as me could take on such an important task. It's a piece of cake. Really? His eyes crinkled slightly with amusement. At the banquet, I quickly realized something was off. Almost every few steps, I bumped into one of Ethan's acquaintances. Fortunately, Ethan hadn't made a comeback yet and wasn't hanging around with them. After a trip to the restroom, however, I ran into him head-on. Ethan's expression was icy, but there was a hint of smugness in his raised brows. Sarah, it's only been 3 days, and you're already dying to come back and apologize. I gasped dramatically, looking him up and down. Where did this waiter come from? Don't you know how to behave properly? His face turned as dark as a storm cloud. His eyes swept over my expensive evening gown, and he frowned. So, you refused to quit your job because of money? I gave him a look of utter disdain. You tell me, who do you think is more attractive? Money or you? Don't embarrass yourself. Perhaps Ethan couldn't handle the fact that someone who had once been devoted to him was now treating him so indifferently. He sneered, his voice sharp. Sarah, how long do you plan to keep this act up? Sure, Hannah is back. But if you want to return to me, I'm willing to forgive you. I burst out laughing. Ethan, your entire net worth couldn't cover a month of my salary. What makes you think you're in any position to welcome me back? Your shamelessness. His face stiffened, the confidence he had clung to so tightly beginning to crack. But without the foolish infatuation I once had, his words no longer affected me. I calmly turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his frustration. My wit had finally taken the high ground. Ethan's gaze darkened, and he strode forward, gripping my wrist tightly. His eyes bore into mine with an intensity that was both sharp and oppressive. Sarah, don't push me. Ethan, I said with a radiant smile, my tone light yet pointed. Do you know even dogs are eating dog food now? He blinked, caught off guard, clearly not understanding where this conversation was going. What are you talking about? I mean, if you have dog food, you should eat it properly. Don't go around eating someone else's trash. It's unhygienic and makes your breath stink. It's also unfair to Hannah. I smiled brightly, a wide, self-assured grin that was a stark contrast to the cautious and self-effacing expression I once wore in front of him. And honestly, if I were going to like someone, it'd be someone handsome. Take a good look at yourself. What about you could ever compare to my boss? I planted a hand on my hip, delivering my words in one smooth breath. A faint ache throbbed in my wrist from Ethan's grip, but it dulled as I noticed the flicker of something breaking in his eyes. A belief, a certainty, perhaps. Then, a familiar, low voice came from behind me, calm yet tinged with amusement. Sarah, at least you've got some taste. A hand intervened, deftly pulling my wrist free from Ethan's grip. Alexander's fingers brushed lightly over the faint red mark on my wrist. Does it hurt? He asked, his eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that made me let down my guard. Almost involuntarily, I nodded. His lips curved faintly. but a cold glint flickered in his gaze. If it hurts, hit him back. Just one punch. I'll raise your salary by $10,000. I rolled up my sleeve, flexing my bicep like a gorilla gearing up for a fight. Your loyal employee obeys. Sir. Ethan's face turned even darker, while Alexander seemed completely unbothered. His demeanor relaxed. Just as I was about to charge forward without hesitation, Alexander caught my wrist with one hand, his tone light. I wouldn't really let you hit him. At some point, the commotion had drawn attention. A group of people had gathered, watching us from a short distance. Among them, I noticed a few of Ethan's friends from last time. Their expressions toward me were as unpleasant as ever. One of them stepped forward, addressing Alexander. Mr. Lane, peace is most important. There's no need to harm relationships over a woman. I stayed silent, and so did Alexander. For a long moment, all eyes were on him. Finally, I glanced up and heard his calm voice. If he uses his gender to suppress you, I'll use my resources to suppress him. In that instant, I silently cursed my past self. In my previous life, it was as if my brain had been kicked by a donkey to quit my job. One of Ethan's friends interjected uneasily. Mr. Lane, isn't this a bit much? His gaze made my skin crawl, and suddenly, I remembered his behavior from the previous life. When I was with Ethan back then, this man often made lewd jokes at my expense. If I got upset, he'd laugh and raise an eyebrow. Come on, it's just a joke. Why are you so uptight? Ethan had typed out a message for me once. Don't sit here if you don't want to. Leave if you can't handle it. But this time, I raised my voice deliberately, ensuring his girlfriend could hear every word. Oh, by the way, there's a hairy mole on his left chest. I saw a ton of those full frontal videos of him circulating online recently. The room fell silent as every gaze turned toward me. The man's girlfriend, her face pale with fury, slapped him hard across the face. You scumbag, she yelled. I smirked and turned to the rest of the group, my gaze sweeping over them. Oh, and about the rest of you. And you, sleeping with your friend's woman behind his back? Or partnering with your friend's competitor to cost him billions? They were dumbstruck. How does she know all this? Afraid I'd say more. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Lane, please do us a favor. Could you stop her from speaking any further? Alexander smirked, exuding confidence. In North Capital, the Lane family stands unmatched. What's the value of your favor? Shall I swipe my card and buy it for you? The room fell silent. Ethan's friends, the ones who had been so arrogant in my previous life, mentally cursed him for provoking someone they couldn't handle. Alexander didn't just back me up against Ethan. He also helped me regain my footing in front of Ethan's future allies. With Alexander around, Ethan's path to rising again seemed far less certain than in my previous life. Satisfied, I turned to Alexander and gave him a playful salute. Boss, your immense kindness will forever be etched in my heart. You're like a savior to me. Alexander cleared his throat, a faint blush creeping across his face. If you're so grateful, offering yourself isn't off the table. Just as he said this, I added with a grin, I'll repay you by being your loyal servant in my next life. His expression darkened. Why not this life? I shrugged nonchalantly. Because I'm an ungrateful and undeserving person. What's wrong, boss? Are you upset? Should I drop to my knees and kowtow 3 times to show my sincerity? That won't be necessary, he replied, though his tone was tinged with exasperation. Ethan, nursing his bruised pride, kept his distance after that. He had his self-respect. After all. Meanwhile, I happily threw myself into my work at the company. True to his word, Alexander raised my salary by $10,000, even though I never got the chance to hit Ethan. He joked that it was payment for entertaining him with all the gossip. As I predicted, without my help, and with Alexander intervening, Ethan faced resistance from many in North Capital. Few dared to collaborate with him, and his fledgling company suffered heavy blows. Just as it was teetering on the edge of collapse, I heard that Hannah had left him again. Ethan spiraled into a period of despair, but he didn't contact me. Instead, I received a call from his father. Sarah, why haven't you visited us lately? Your aunt and I talk about you every day. She's been so worried about you that she can't sleep. She's fallen ill these past few days and has been bedridden, constantly calling your name in her sleep." My heart softened at his words. In my previous life, one of the reasons I stayed by Ethan's side was because of his parents. They had always treated me well. Whenever Ethan ignored me, they would take turns scolding him. But after he became mute, his parents couldn't bear to criticize him anymore. Gripping my phone tightly, I felt a warmth rise in my chest, and my eyes misted over. "Uncle," I said softly, "I'll come visit you both once I'm done with work. Tell Auntie to take care of herself." "Good, good," he replied, his voice filled with joy. "She'll be so happy to see you." Lowering my voice, I asked cautiously, "Uncle, Ethan's not at home, is he?" There was a brief pause before he reassured me. "He's not. That boy wouldn't dare show his face around here. Sarah, don't worry. Your aunt and I will always have your back." Hearing his response, I finally felt a wave of relief wash over me. I didn't want to see Ethan or have any contact with him, but his parents had been kind to me in the past. And now that his mother was sick, not visiting would feel ungrateful. During this time, I'd already started thinking about branching out on my own. Following Ethan in the past had exposed me to many opportunities and taught me a lot. I was confident in my skills, and I had already discussed my plans with Alexander in advance. Alexander had said, "Sarah, I've always known your potential goes far beyond this company." After finishing my work for the week, I decided to visit Ethan's parents on Saturday. It had been so long that I almost forgot where they used to live before Ethan's success. All I remembered was how later, Ethan had moved them into the biggest and best villa. I arrived with several gifts in hand. Ethan's father greeted me with a warm smile. Just like in the past, nothing had changed. His parents were still as welcoming as ever. After some chatting, I helped his mother back to her room to rest. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she said, "Sarah, you're so kind and virtuous. If only Ethan could marry someone like you." I didn't respond. Kind and virtuous was hardly a compliment in my book. After tidying up, I got ready to say my goodbyes and head home, but his mother grabbed my hand and said, "Sarah, could you do me a favor and fetch a necklace from the room next to Ethan's? It's in the cabinet." I nodded, not noticing the fleeting guilt in her eyes. I walked into the room she mentioned and spotted the cabinet right away. I quickly found the necklace and was just about to leave when I heard a sound behind me. Turning around, I realized the door was shut tight. A sense of unease crept over me as I called out, "Uncle, Auntie, could you please open the door?" From outside, his mother's voice replied, "Sarah, there's a misunderstanding between you and Ethan that needs to be resolved. Don't blame me, sweetheart. I just want you two to have a proper talk." It felt as though my heart had plummeted from a great height. The faint hope I had held on to shattered completely. "Sarah, don't bother trying to get out," she added. "This room was remodeled by your uncle. It's not easy for just anyone to open it." That moment, I felt like I'd been plunged into an icy abyss. My body felt as though it was sinking deeper and deeper. I pulled out my phone, but as expected, there was no signal. They had planned everything, from pretending his mother was sick to remodeling the room. They even knew I would help them look for something. The effort they'd gone to, just to trap me, was astonishing. When I didn't respond, Ethan's father spoke up. "Sarah, don't be upset. Your aunt and I don't mean to harm you. Ethan will be back soon. When he's here, just have a good talk with him." Okay. There was no room for refusal. When Ethan finally returned, I was sitting calmly in a chair, staring blankly at the door. I heard the sound of it unlocking, and then Ethan's face appeared. He rushed toward me and pulled me into a tight hug, his breathing heavy and erratic. Sarah, you still care about me, don't you? Mom and Dad said they tricked you into thinking I was in a car accident, and you came running without a second thought. If I ever ended up in such a situation, I know you'd be the one by my side." I sat motionless, letting him hold me. After a long pause, when he still wouldn't let go, I finally curled my lips into a mocking smile. "Ethan, you're pathetic." He froze. "A decent horse never doubles back on its tracks, and I certainly won't return to a rotting, withered pasture. Your parents imprisoning me is illegal." His arms loosened, and he stared at me in stunned silence. Do you know? I said firmly before he could respond. You knew about your parents tricking me into coming here with a fake story about your illness. But you pretended not to know. As if that could absolve you of any involvement. I shouldn't have had any illusions about your parents. You're all the same. Rotten to the core. Ethan's aura turned icy. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to tilt my head up and meet his gaze. Sarah, stop testing my limits over and over again. Didn't you used to like me the most? That was before. I replied coolly. Before I realized you didn't care about my feelings. But now, I get it. I don't love some imagined version of Hannah. I love you. The one who's always been by my side. Can we start over? I know Alexander was just pretending to be your boyfriend. You're not dating him. If this had been my past life, before I'd signed the divorce papers, I would have been so overwhelmed by his words that I'd stammer out a tearful response. But some words, when said too late, become nothing more than empty noise. I echoed the words he once used against me. Ethan, don't bother. If someone as perfect as Hannah couldn't bring out the best in you, how could anyone else? You're useless. His voice trembled, barely audible. But I only like you. I scoffed. You don't understand me. All you see is someone who's not ambitious enough, not striving for greatness. You've never truly accepted me. You even compare me to self-made CEOs, belittling me. It's not about liking me. It's about the pedestal you've put Hannah on. She's your white moonlight. Unattainable and untouchable, which is why you're obsessed with her. People always crave what they can't have. I leaned back in my chair, watching his expression crumble as I continued. Now that Hannah's back, just like I used to, she'll stick by your side and help you rebuild your business empire. You'll have your happy moments. Like any normal couple, Hannah will comfort and support you. But she's different from me. I smirked and added, Hannah believes in motivational encouragement. Remember that time with Mr. Zhang? His family went bankrupt, and he started his own business. Every day, he negotiated with other CEOs, drinking until late at night. Once, he almost drank himself to death. Or Mr. Wang, whose company went bankrupt twice. He nearly took his own life but managed to pull through. She'll tell you to look at those examples, to learn from them, and remind you that with your finance background, starting a business shouldn't be difficult for you. I paused for a moment before delivering the final blow. But unlike Hannah, I was soft and accommodating in the past. That's not who I am. I've always been impatient. It was my blind infatuation with you that changed me. Now, I'm clear-headed. I smiled, my tone light but piercing. And honestly, is she wrong? Ethan, no one wants you. Meanwhile, I've got plenty of suitors. Okay. His eyes turned red. His words stuck in his throat. He knew as well as I did that without my help, he wouldn't have secured the critical deal that Alexander had intentionally allowed him to win. That deal was the cornerstone of his success in my previous life. Now, it was gone, and nothing he did could bring it back. His frustration boiled over as he slammed the door behind him, leaving me with a bitter, parting remark. Sarah, I hope you wake up one day. I stayed seated, unfazed. My social life wasn't exactly vibrant. And the person I'd been spending the most time with lately was Alexander. But he was the company's CEO. And tomorrow was Sunday. Chances were, no one would notice if I went off the grid for a while. I curled up in the chair, quietly staring at the small window on the wall, faintly glimpsing the moonlight outside. A soft noise broke through my thoughts. Startled, I froze for a moment until a familiar voice spoke from above. Sarah, didn't even react to a sound? Why are you so out of it? I looked up and saw someone who shouldn't have been there. Alexander Lane. He had managed to open the tiny window and was leaning inside, his expression hovering between amusement and something else that felt a bit off. His slightly exaggerated grin was almost funny, but I sharply noticed that he seemed upset. Mr. Lane, why are you here? I asked. He raised a brow. If I waited for you to come out on your own, who knows how much work would get delayed? His tone was dry, almost sarcastic, typical capitalist. Seconds passed as we just looked at each other in silence. Finally, I asked, did you call the police? He tilted his head. Are you really willing to call the police? Of course. They're holding me against my will, restricting my personal freedom. Why wouldn't I call the police? Alexander muttered under his breath. I thought you still had feelings for Ethan and wouldn't report him. What feelings? I couldn't imagine what kind of mental gymnastics Alexander had to perform to keep himself so steady in that tiny window. I urged him. Hurry up and call the police. He gave me a teasing glance. Should I really go? Yes. Go. I said firmly. But minutes passed. And he didn't move. Confused. I stared at him. And for once, he looked unusually serious. Even concerned. I was worried you might get scared if I left, he said softly. Scared of what? He averted his gaze. Aren't you afraid of the dark? How do you know I'm afraid of the dark? In my past life, after spending so much time around Ethan, he would always dismiss my fears with comments like, "What's there to be scared of in the dark? Can't you stop being so dramatic?" I had forced myself to suppress those fears. And eventually, they seemed to fade. Now, I stared directly at Alexander, waiting for an answer, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Outside, Ethan must have heard a sound. As he unlocked the door and stepped inside, Alexander had already slipped away from the window, leaving it closed and undisturbed. Moonlight streamed through, casting a calm glow over the room. Ethan's shoulders visibly relaxed as he asked, "Are you hungry?" I didn't respond. I was waiting for Alexander, who had promised to get me out of there. Moments later, the sound of police sirens shattered the silence. The entire Gu family froze in shock. The signal in the house had been blocked, so I couldn't make any calls or communicate with the outside world. Ethan seemed to realize something and suddenly turned to look at me. His gaze darkened when he saw Alexander striding in and pulling me into his arms. I stared directly at Ethan, then turned to Alexander and asked softly, "Did you know me before?" He stiffened slightly, his usually composed face growing colder. I continued, "You knew I was afraid of the dark. In my past life, you gave up that deal to me, and when you couldn't contact me, you found your way to Ethan's place. It's hard not to suspect you knew something." For a moment, he didn't say anything. His silence as heavy as his demeanor. Finally, he smirked faintly and said, "I was planning to wait until you were gone. Put a QR code on your tombstone so you could scan it and remember what you'd forgotten. But it looks like you figured it out a little early. How frustrating. But you don't look frustrated at all." For now, Ethan didn't want to talk about the past. He ran away, and the police couldn't find where he'd gone. Alexander was worried about me, so he personally drove me home every night. He wouldn't leave until he saw my apartment lights come on. For a few days, everything seemed peaceful, but I couldn't stop frowning, wondering why Ethan had fled. Running away would only worsen his punishment. His company, though small, had required a significant investment. Almost all of his family's remaining money had been poured into his projects. Recently, there had been a bidding event at work where I noticed Lane Enterprises was also preparing to compete. In my past life, Lane Enterprises hadn't won the bid, allowing Ethan and me to pick up the pieces. Now, however, Ethan's company was leaderless and in chaos. Seeing the company I had worked so hard to build in the past reduced to this state left me feeling disoriented and uneasy. Alexander had known about it before I did. He called me into his office to break the news. Lifting his gaze lazily, he asked, "Sarah, what did you ever see in a man like that?" I shrugged. "I don't know. You tell me." He clenched his jaw, letting out a silent, frustrated laugh. "I don't want my future kids inheriting a criminal record. I know the world's top eye specialists. Want me to book you a free appointment? You clearly need your eyes checked. You can't even recognize a decent man standing right in front of you." Liking Ethan was like carrying a criminal record. It left you cautious and full of regrets. The following days were a whirlwind of work, and Ethan didn't appear again. Soon, I wouldn't have to work for anyone else or live my life for someone else. I had the skills. Why not start my own venture? Alexander fully supported my decision. He told me, if a company fears its employees becoming too capable and leaving to start their own business, then that company won't survive in the long run. One evening, under the dim glow of the streetlights, Alexander drove me to my apartment complex as usual. I asked him to drop me off at the gate, not wanting to cause any misunderstandings. The security guards had started to assume he was my boyfriend, and I didn't want the rumors to spread. He hesitated, then said, "You're worried I'll scare off potential boyfriends, aren't you?" I rolled my eyes and walked into the complex on my own. As I approached my building, I remembered the light at the entrance was broken. The thought made me uneasy. When I reached the stairwell, a hand suddenly reached out from the shadows and pulled me into the landing between floors. Another hand clamped tightly over my mouth, silencing me completely. The moment our breaths mingled, I could hear the person's rapid heartbeat. The sensation was so familiar that it only took seconds for me to realize it was Ethan. But wasn't he still wanted by the police? Ethan slowly released his hand from my mouth, his breathing heavy, his heartbeat frantic. His dark, haunted eyes locked onto mine. I forced myself to stay calm. "Ethan, don't make things worse for yourself." His voice trembled, raw and unsteady, like that of a lost child. "I think I've already made a mistake. What should I do now?" I froze, understanding his unspoken words. He wasn't talking about his crimes. He was talking about letting Hannah go. He held my hand slowly, his palm damp with sweat and trembling. In the dim light, I could see that his eyes were slightly red. His voice, soft and unsteady, broke through the silence. "Sarah, why did you push me away to someone else? Don't you like me anymore?" My mind roared, a cacophony of emotions threatening to drown me. I clenched my palms tightly to stay calm. He continued, his voice fragile yet persistent. "These days, I keep dreaming about you, over and over again." This didn't make sense. At this point in his life, Ethan shouldn't have any feelings for me. Yet, he kept talking. "In my dreams, I know it's you and me, but the scenes I see, they've never happened before." I glanced toward the stairwell, trying to think of a way to escape. I forced myself to respond indifferently. "For example?" He swallowed hard and said, "In one dream, I saw that Hannah didn't return to the country. She died abroad. I pretended to be mute, and yet you insisted on marrying me. You stayed by my side, helped me rebuild, and worked tirelessly to help me rise again. I even dreamed of you drinking with executives to secure contracts, until it caused you to bleed internally." My gaze shot up to meet his, my disbelief barely masked. These were all real events from my past life. How could he have dreamed about them? But I forced my face to remain calm. "If these are the things you came to tell me, you're wasting your time. I'm not the person you're looking for." He grabbed my arm again, his eyes trembling with emotion, his entire being on the verge of collapse. "Sarah, you've been reborn too, haven't you?" I stared at him, my tone cold. "Ethan, you're delusional." The moment those words left my mouth, he seemed to snap completely. His voice cracked with desperation. "I went mad the moment I realized you liked Alexander, and I pushed you toward Hannah. I've been insane ever since." Before I could react, he lowered his head, aiming for my lips. I turned away at the last second, his kiss landing awkwardly on my cheek. And then, a loud thud. I didn't even see the punch coming. But Ethan was already sprawled on the ground, his eyes still fixed on me. Despite the pain, he begged hoarsely, "Sarah, don't leave me. I'm begging you. Please." I averted my eyes, focusing instead on Alexander, who stepped forward, wrapping an arm around my waist. His body was stiff, awkward in its closeness. Lowering my voice, I asked, "Why are you here?" "You didn't reply to my messages," he said plainly. "I was worried something had happened, so I came to check on you." Relief washed over me as I exhaled quietly. Ethan was arrested for unlawful detention. Although his parents were partly involved, he was the primary culprit. His attempt to evade the law only added to his charges. When he requested to see me, I went. He had shaved his head and looked nothing like the Ethan I once knew. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, filled with remorse. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the person I've wronged the most in this life is you. I'm so sorry for how I treated you in the past life. If I had remembered sooner, if I had treated you better, would things have turned out differently?" I cut him off, meeting his gaze with unwavering coldness. "No. From the moment I decided to divorce you, I stopped liking you." The light in his eyes faded completely, and his already frail frame seemed to wither further. He looked like a skeleton, devoid of hope or vitality. "Ethan," I said, my tone steady, The person you should regret failing the most isn't me. It's the company you built with your own hands. Because that was once our shared dream. 2. I stopped paying attention to Ethan. He had truly disappeared from my life. Alexander often invited me to networking dinners. First, I wanted to decline, but he raised an eyebrow and said, "Don't you want to start your own business? How are you going to succeed if you don't understand the market?" I grumbled inwardly but didn't dare argue. As the dinner was wrapping up, I stepped out to pay the bill. When I returned, I overheard the group talking about me. "Mr. Lane, you seem to really like this young lady. Why not make her your secretary?" It wasn't uncommon for people like them to move someone they liked into their office, using the position of a personal assistant to keep them close. Alexander raised an eyebrow, his tone indulgent but firm. "She has her own skills. Why would I trap her by my side? The best I can do is provide her a platform to showcase her talents." That's enough. The others exchanged glances and chuckled. Most didn't take his words seriously, brushing it off as nothing more than indulgence for a woman. But years later, I founded one of the country's leading women's products companies. When they saw how much money I was making, they came to me, begging for advice on how to replicate my success. I smiled at them. If you want to make money from women, start by learning to respect them. Of course, that's a story for another time. At the dinner's end, Alexander drove me home as usual. When we arrived, I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I turned and stared at him, my gaze steady and probing. "Alexander, you once said we'd met before. Could you explain?" His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, and he looked away, his usual composure faltering. "You don't want to know." I pressed further. "Try me." After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was quieter than usual. It was during a tough time in my life. My business had failed, and I didn't even have $5 in my pocket. I sat outside a convenience store, staring at the sky, wondering if I'd ever stand back up again. "You came out of the store and mistook me for a homeless man. You bought me something to eat and drink." For me, it was a casual act of kindness, something so insignificant I didn't even remember it. But for him, it was unforgettable. He added, "Later, when I saw you working with Ethan, I couldn't help but offer you that deal." I was quiet for a moment, then teased, "Why didn't you mention this earlier? Didn't want to remind yourself of those struggles?" He shook his head, his gaze avoiding mine. "I don't see that time as a stain on my life. I just wanted you to always see me as strong and capable." I reached out, cupping his face with both hands, forcing him to look at me. "No one is always strong, just as no one is always weak. It's because of who you were then that you are who you are now. And your success now, it's amazing." "Really?" I nodded firmly. "Really? I think you're both cool and handsome." He stared at me for a long moment before the corner of his mouth curled into a smile. A small, mischievous hook. His voice was low and magnetic. "How about you consider making this official? I'm a great investment. Low risk, guaranteed returns." I couldn't help but laugh. "Fine. I'll reluctantly accept your offer." Sometimes, someone appears in your life when you're covered in scars and full of doubt, giving you the chance to love and be loved again. Later, Alexander joked that his throat was sore for days from trying to convince me that night. "Good thing you like me." And so, the first story came to an end, making way for a new beginning. The second story started on the day of my engagement party with Aaron. After 10 years of dating, we were finally tying the knot. But on the day of the party, his secretary showed up late, wearing a white dress. Aaron's voice was cold as he told her to leave, his words sharp and unforgiving. Everyone praised him for his loyalty to me, painting the secretary as a shameless social climber. But only I knew the truth. In the 4 years I was abroad, Aaron spent every anniversary of our relationship with her, his beloved secretary, Zoe. The story begins today. At my engagement party with Aaron, after 10 years together, we were finally celebrating our milestone. The banquet was filled with well wishes and congratulations from the guests. Aaron held me by the waist as we made rounds toasting the guests. He was unusually drunk tonight, his chin resting against my shoulder as he murmured, "Aaron, you're finally back." His breath, tinged with alcohol, made my ears warm. Suddenly, The clinking of glasses in the hall came to an abrupt halt. The doors swung open, and a woman entered, wearing a dazzling white gown adorned with diamonds that sparkled under the lights. The red carpet from the ceremony hadn't yet been removed, and she walked in like a bride arriving late for her own wedding. The room fell silent, every gaze turning toward me. The engagement ceremony had already concluded, and the banquet was simply for entertaining guests. I was wearing a more practical and understated dress for toasting, which paled in comparison to Zoe's extravagant gown, one that looked ready for a wedding. Aaron's arm stiffened slightly around my waist. Then, in a low, grave voice, he said, "What are you doing?" Zoe froze at his tone, clearly startled, but her eyes still held a hint of defiance. "I just came from a bridal photography exhibition hosted by a friend. It was her graduation project, and I didn't have time to change." "Get out." Aaron cut her off, his voice cold and commanding, louder than I had ever heard it before. Aaron rarely lost his temper in public, but this sharp rebuke brought tears to Zoe's eyes. She gripped the edge of her skirt tightly, her face flushed with humiliation, and turned to leave under the watchful gaze of the crowd. The murmurs and suspicions among the guests quickly dissipated. Aaron lowered his head to kiss the corner of my lips, his tone soft and reassuring. "Aaron, don't feel bad. She's the one who crossed the line, and she deserved that." His arm tightened protectively around my waist, his voice as gentle as ever, but my fingertips grew colder and colder. I had seen those earrings Zoe was wearing before. When Aaron and I were selecting accessories for the wedding, I had chosen a pair of understated pearl earrings with small diamond accents. But Aaron said they were too plain and didn't match the grandeur of my 2 wedding dresses. So, I chose a different pair from the new collection and didn't think about the pearls again. But now, those same earrings hung from Zoe's ears, perfectly complementing her dress. Aaron had secretly bought them, not for me, but for her. Later, my best friend, Grace, called to vent her frustration. "Aaron, that little snake did it on purpose. Didn't she? It was your engagement party. For crying out loud. She shows up late wearing that kind of dress? The nerve. And after everything you've done for her, helping her with school, getting her a good job, she turns around and tries to steal your fiancé. What a backstabber." When I didn't respond for a long time, Grace paused before sighing. "But hey, at least Aaron handled it well. Don't let this make you doubt him. He really loves you." Grace wasn't the only one who thought so. Even my parents believed Zoe's behavior was simply a lapse in judgment. To everyone else, Aaron was the perfect fiancé. Young, accomplished, from a prestigious family, and impossibly handsome. He was considerate, gentle, and had been by my side for a decade without a single scandal. When I decided to delay our marriage to study abroad, he supported me wholeheartedly. Before I left, he arranged a meeting between our families to set our engagement. When I returned, he said, "Whenever you're ready, we'll get engaged and married." Aaron kept every promise he made to me. I had no reason not to marry a man like him. If only I hadn't seen those earrings. I hung up the phone and stared blankly at the device on the table. Aaron had always been open and honest. He never hid anything. Even when he went to take a shower, his phone would sit right in front of me. That's why, when a few messages popped up on the screen, I couldn't help but glance at them. "I really didn't mean to steal the spotlight from you, Aaron. I've already apologized to him. Can you stop being angry with me? I know I was wrong. I've been punished enough. My leg's broken." Rain was pouring heavily outside, and the messages left a sour taste in my mouth. Suddenly, I felt an arm wrap around my waist from behind. Aaron smelled faintly of his usual shower gel. Every time he finished bathing, he liked to hold me like this, pulling me onto his lap while we curled up on the couch to watch a movie or play games. I pressed my lips together. "Your phone keeps buzzing. Seems like something urgent." "Nothing's urgent today." He kissed my temple. "It's our 10th anniversary, Aaron." Aaron had a habit of completely shutting out work on our anniversaries, muting group chats, turning on airplane mode, and ignoring any messages or calls. But this time, he hadn't. When I saw him light up his phone, I felt his body stiffen for a split second. "Sorry, Aaron," he said, his voice unsteady. "There's an urgent PR issue I need to handle." It was the first time Aaron had ever lied to me so poorly. I didn't call him out on it. Instead, I watched as he hastily threw on a coat and left the house in a rush. His clothes still unkempt. The sight was almost laughable. Aaron rarely acted this flustered, and the fact that it was for Zoe made it all the more absurd. 4 years ago, when I was preparing to leave the country, I had asked Aaron to look after Zoe. She had just finished high school, supported by the financial aid I'd provided throughout her education. She had gotten into a good university and seemed so fragile when she found out I was leaving. The scrawny girl hugged me tightly, her eyes swollen like walnuts. "Sis, will you still remember me when you come back?" I tousled her hair, pulling her closer. "Don't say such silly things. Of course, I'll remember you. Where else would I go?" I had winked at Aaron and added, "Besides, you've got your brother-in-law to back you up." Aaron had smiled helplessly, his gaze warm as always. From the time Zoe started high school until she graduated from college and began working at Aaron's company, I had supported her every step of the way. Even when she became Aaron's secretary, it was with my approval. School and the real world are so different. There's so much I don't understand yet. She used to say, "Thank goodness I have your husband to guide me." She would always share her daily life with me, chatting endlessly. On our anniversaries, she'd never fail to send me her blessings. "Happy anniversary, Aaron. Your husband is amazing." But this year, there was nothing. Ever since I came back, Zoe had barely contacted me. A notification appeared on my phone. Zoe had updated her social media with a new post. "Things haven't been going well for me lately. But tonight, the moon is beautiful." The accompanying photo showed her arm in a cast. A hospital dressing visible. In the corner of the picture, barely noticeable, was a man's hand. I knew that hand all too well. It had tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear just half an hour ago. I clicked on Zoe's profile. She had changed her settings, allowing me to see more of her posts. As I scrolled, I found entries I hadn't seen before, and all of them, without exception, were about Aaron. The earliest one was from 4 years ago, not long after I had left the country. "He's like the moon in the night sky. I'm the child who's happy just to be bathed in moonlight." The picture showed a few medication boxes and the silhouette of Aaron standing in a hospital hallway. I remembered that time clearly. Zoe had fallen seriously ill, and with no family in the city to help her, I had been worried sick, fearing for her health. I asked Aaron to check on her for me. He had driven through the night and video called me from her bedside. His brow furrowed with exhaustion. He was just 18 years old back then, practically still a child. Aaron used to tell me, "Aaron, you're only 24 yourself." He'd reach out through the screen during our video calls, as if to stroke my face, and assure me, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the people you care about." He never broke a promise. Under Aaron's care, Zoe smoothly made it through 4 years of college. She'd share her daily life with me, and I thought I knew everything about her. But today, I realized there were over 100 posts on her hidden social media that I had never seen. One post read, "I'm so happy today. He brought me a cake." When I closed my eyes to make a wish, I made him close his eyes too. His eyes are so beautiful. I wish this moment could last forever. Another post showed a video call notification from me. The caption was heartbreaking. I was so sad. The card had both of their names written together. I didn't like it. The card was from Aaron. His handwriting was unmistakable. The cake and the message were things I had picked out in advance. Aaron had simply followed through on my instructions. Yet, in the signature at the bottom, he had added a small flourish, a tiny heart drawn between our names. Zoe had scratched out my name. I remembered that day clearly. She had messaged me, "Aaron, this is the best birthday I've ever had. Thank you." I had replied, "We'll celebrate many more birthdays together." As I scrolled further, my fingers began to tremble. If the earlier posts were the delusions of someone hopelessly infatuated, the later ones showed a mutual understanding, a shared ambiguity that neither had spoken aloud. He said I looked really cute today. He told me to buy more clothes like this. Work is so exhausting. But at least he brought me an iced Americano. So bitter though. Who slipped me watermelon-flavored candies to cheer me up? Another late night at the office. No overtime pay. But who else has a boss who compensates with a limited edition necklace? In one post, Zoe shared a 9-photo grid of selfies wearing the necklace. Her captions playful and full of the giddiness of a young girl in love. The photos told a story of intimacy. Aaron driving her to and from work, bringing her umbrellas on rainy days, postponing meetings for her, praising her work, and taking her out for lavish dinners. The final posts were the most devastating. The day before I returned to the country, Zoe had posted a photo of Aaron's silhouette with the caption, "Is it ending now?" Then, a picture of the pearl earrings I hadn't bought but had admired. A gift from Aaron. Her caption read, "I'm willing to be a mouse, begging for scraps in the darkness, as long as I can see my moon." Finally, there was a post from our engagement day. "I'm not willing to accept this. And tonight, the moon is beautiful." My fingers froze, turning as cold as ice. Mechanically swiping through the screen, felt as though every image, every word, was a dagger plunging into my chest, tearing me apart. The betrayal, replayed over and over, left me bleeding out. Then a message from Aaron appeared. "Aaron, the situation is a bit tricky. I won't make it home tonight. Don't wait up. You've been tired lately. Make sure to get some rest. I love you. Good night." The phone screen dimmed gradually, its glow fading into darkness. A tidal wave of emotion crashed over me. When I stood, I realized a sound was filling the room. A faint, rhythmic tapping against my eardrums. It took me a moment to understand it was my teeth chattering. When I was younger, I was bold and brazen, but after turning 20, I had learned to temper my emotions, to maintain composure in any situation. Or so I thought. I was wrong. I didn't scream or cry. I didn't lash out in rage. But the entire room seemed to quake. My body trembled uncontrollably, every inch of me shaking. In the living room, Aaron had set up candles, 99 of them, all burning brightly. He had said that tonight, for our 10th anniversary, there should have been 100. But he left the last one for me to light. The candles sat within reach, but no one was waiting for me to light it. When I bent down in the kitchen to grab the scissors, tears fell and extinguished the first candle. Thinking back, this was the first time Aaron had ever made me cry. The very first time in our 10 years together. Cutting the wick of each candle should have been quick and simple, but it took me 3 whole hours to snuff them all out. When I finally finished, I collapsed onto the couch, staring out at the horizon as the sky began to lighten. I listed the house on a second-hand marketplace. To be honest, dealing with moving companies and negotiating with real estate agents was a first for me. I wasn't familiar with the process, and with my voice thick from crying, every conversation felt awkward and stilted. But I managed to get everything done. I suppose leaving someone is like that, too. When the movers arrived, they asked what should be done with Aaron's things. "Should we pack them up with yours?" I shook my head. "Take them downstairs and throw them away. Or keep them if you like." These were all things Aaron had carefully chosen for our wedding preparations. But they were useless now. The movers exchanged glances, their eyes lighting up momentarily before cautiously looking back at me. "It's fine," I said, voice calm but firm. "I can afford to replace every single item here. And Aaron? He's just another thing I've outgrown. I've always had plenty of properties in this city, but the only one I truly lived in was the house Aaron and I had planned to share." That morning, I booked 2 plane tickets and dragged Grace along on a trip. When she saw me, Grace teased, "Miss Lynn, what's the occasion? Shouldn't you be going on a sweet getaway with your fiancé instead of me?" 4 years ago, Grace and I had both chosen to study abroad. Though in different countries, it had been a long time since we'd had a chance to meet up alone. "There's no fiancé anymore." Grace raised an eyebrow playfully. "Well, technically, you could call him your husband now, couldn't you? Aaron cheated." It took Grace a moment to process my words. "Impossible," she blurted out. "The odds of every man on earth dying are higher than Aaron cheating." I couldn't blame her. Our story was like something out of a fairy tale. In high school, Aaron and I were both popular figures, but our reputations couldn't have been more different. Aaron was the top student, calm and dependable, with the kind of looks that made him the perfect older brother figure. The golden boy of the school. His desk drawers were constantly stuffed with love letters, and he was a permanent feature on the school's confession wall. I, on the other hand, was the wild rich girl, the rebel, When the school mandated that we tie our hair back, I went and got mine permed into big waves. I was summoned to the principal's office so often it felt like home. No one thought Aaron and I were a good match. Not even me. That's why I never expected Aaron to pursue me so openly. He waited for me after class. Even requested a schedule change so we could be in the same homeroom. Teachers called him to the office multiple times to warn him. His persistence amused me. Blowing smoke in his direction, I asked, "Aaron, are you out of your mind? I'm not into guys like you." "What kind of guys do you like?" he asked. I smirked. "Guys who smoke, drink, and fight. You know, the complete opposite of you." Aaron didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached into my pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it using mine. He didn't know how to smoke, though, and ended up coughing violently. Someone snapped a picture, and the photo was soon plastered all over the school's forum. Everyone said he'd lost his mind. I thought so too, until the day I got into an argument that spiraled out of control. I was accused of bullying a delicate, teary-eyed girl who cried her heart out in the office. The school decided to make an example of me, calling a meeting in front of all the students and staff to reprimand me. When my name was mentioned, Aaron stood up from the crowd and walked to the podium. "Show us proof," he said clearly, his voice unwavering. The room fell silent. Aaron repeated, "If you can't provide evidence that Lynn Aaron bullied anyone, then what you're doing is defamation. And everyone who spreads this lie is complicit." I had always been too proud to care about others' opinions. But in that moment, as Aaron stepped forward, I realized how wonderful it felt to have someone believe in you so firmly. After that, I cut my hair, quit smoking, and stopped sleeping in class. But I still didn't say yes to him. From that day on, however, Aaron's name dominated the confession wall, and mine was right beside it. Our names were always paired together. Even now, Aaron and I were still ranked as the top campus couple of our old university on social media. Wearing sunglasses, I found the sunlight particularly blinding. My phone buzzed incessantly, a never-ending stream of vibrations. Over the past 2 days, Aaron had called me at least 100 times. I hadn't declined a single call, but I hadn't answered any either. Grace waved her phone at me. "Aaron's looking for you. Don't you want to talk to him? Maybe it's all a misunderstanding." I shook my head and closed my eyes. "Zoe's no angel," Grace added. "That little brat could have set this all up on purpose. You know she's manipulative." I exhaled slowly. "Zoe's a piece of work. That's for sure. I know all her tricks. But she couldn't have crossed the line without Aaron allowing it. No matter how clever she is, she wouldn't have gotten her hands on those earrings. Earrings only Aaron ever saw me admire. Without his permission, she wouldn't have dared wear a wedding dress and crash our engagement party unless his 4 years of favoritism emboldened her to do so. I had seen how Aaron loved me once, so I knew exactly why he acted so out of character that day. He felt sorry, but not for me anymore. Cutting off 10 years of connection was far harder than I imagined. Our lives were too entwined. Beyond our relationship, we had intertwined projects at work, things that couldn't be resolved overnight. When I returned to the city, Zoe found me before Aaron did. She ran up to me, grabbing my arm. "Where have you been? Aaron's been looking everywhere for you. He's losing his mind." Zoe was shorter than me. She tilted her head upward, her round eyes wide and brimming with innocence. The same helpless look she'd had 8 years ago. Back then, her hair was dry and brittle, her family poor and desperate. Her grandfather had refused to let her attend school, insisting she work to support her younger brother. Despite being a child herself, Zoe had been skilled at household chores. She knew I was sponsoring impoverished students but stayed distant, letting her brother take most of the benefits. One day, when her grandfather wasn't home, I found her crouched by the stove, tending a fire. "Do you want to go to school?" I asked. "Do you want to leave this village?" Her eyes widened, filled with fear and hope. Her fingers twisted the hem of her worn shirt as she stared at me. Unsure if she could trust me, she looked like a stray puppy, abandoned but desperate for help. I crouched down and hugged her. "If you want to go, I'll take you. I'll help you." She clutched my sleeve like I was her only lifeline and whispered, "Sister." From that day on, she called me sister for 8 years. And every time she did, No matter how angry I was, I would soften. But now, hearing her call me sister only made my stomach churn. He couldn't find me? Shouldn't you be happy about that? I pried her fingers off my arm. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? During the few days I spent traveling, trying to clear my head, Zoe had been busy updating her social media. If only this time could last a little longer. I wish the moon could always belong to me. Her captions revealed everything, leaving no room for pretense. Zoe froze for a moment, the innocent expression on her face gradually fading. Instead, there was a hint of relief, as if she had finally made up her mind. She took a step back. "Aaron," she said, her voice steady. "For all these years, I've been so grateful for everything you've done for me. I used to tell myself that when I grew up, I find a way to repay you. But what can I give someone who already has everything? Now that I'm grown, I realize that apart from your charity, I have nothing. I owe you so much." Zoe began, her voice trembling. "Everything you've given me, I'll repay little by little. And for what I can't repay right now, I'll work for the rest of my life to make it up to you. Whatever you want to take back, I'll return it to you. But Aaron, he's not an object. He belongs to the person he loves. And right now, he loves me." Her words struck me like a slap, each syllable dripping with misplaced conviction. "Aaron loves me," she repeated, her tone unwavering. "When he decided to love me, he didn't hesitate. Not for a second. He was braver than I ever was when I accepted your help. I had never known a person could be so shameless." To Zoe, the only thing she owed me was material, financial aid, designer bags, clothes, and luxury items. She didn't understand, and perhaps never would, that the most valuable thing she ever received was my genuine, unconditional kindness. "Aaron loves you?" I laughed coldly. "To what extent?" "Exactly." Her face turned pale. Deep down, she knew the truth. That's why she came to me, hoping I would walk away willingly. She understood that as long as I didn't let go, Aaron never would. If he could, he wouldn't have rushed to propose as soon as I returned to the country. Speak of the devil. Aaron appeared just then. The moment he saw me, he broke into a sprint, almost getting hit by a car as he crossed the street without hesitation. He stopped in front of me, wrapping me in a tight embrace. "Where have you been? Why haven't you been answering my calls? The house, why is it empty? They told me you're selling it. Why, Aaron, what's going on?" His eyes were red as he looked down at me, noticing how lightly I was dressed. He unbuttoned his coat and carefully wrapped it around me, pulling me into his warmth. Zoe stood there the whole time, just a few feet away. It was as if Aaron didn't even see her. Her fingers dug into her palms, her face as pale as paper. "Aaron," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Aaron didn't respond. He didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, he rubbed my freezing hands between his voice full of concern. "It's too cold outside. Aaron, you'll catch a cold. Let's go home." "Okay, let's go home." Aaron had bought back the house. Everything I had thrown away before I left had been restored to its original place within days, as if I had never left. He wanted everything to go back to how it was before. But how could that be possible? A broken glass, no matter how carefully pieced back together, would still show its cracks. Once the ongoing projects were completed, I would announce the cancellation of the wedding to the media. I'd leave it to Aaron to explain things to his parents. If they had any questions, they could call me. "Don't hold me like this," I said, gently pushing against his chest. "It's not appropriate anymore, given our current relationship." Aaron's arms, solid and unyielding, tightened around me. His voice shook, something I had rarely heard before. "Aaron, why?" I was silent for a long time. I wanted to ask so many questions. Why were the earrings not suitable for me but perfect for Zoe? Why had his care for her, born from my request, turned into something deeper? Why did 6 years of growing together, from youth to maturity, mean less to him than the 4 years he had with someone else? Why did he blur the boundaries, allowing someone else to cross into a space that was supposed to belong to us? I looked at the face I had loved for 10 years, suppressing all the emotions threatening to erupt. In the end, I only asked him one question. The night of our 10th anniversary, Who did you go to see? Aaron froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist, holding me tightly. Aaron, he pleaded. That night, Zoe was hurt. I just went to see her, Aaron said, his voice trembling. You went to see her? I asked coldly. Then why did you tell me you were going to the office? If it was just to see her, why did you have to hide it from me? Aaron, I continued, my tone sharp. Don't forget, I'm the one who sponsored Zoe. If anyone has a right to care about her, it's me. I extended my hand, prying his fingers off mine one by one. Stop pretending to love me. Your love is too cheap. I'm not some charity case. Aaron, I'm worth more than that. Aaron's eyes turned red, the veins in them almost visible. In a near frenzy, he pushed me down onto the sofa, his strength unrelenting, like a beast gone mad. Cheap? Lynn Aaron, how can you say that so calmly? After all these years, what have I ever meant to you? Did you stay with me just to repay me for saving your life? Did you ever love me at all? His words dragged me back to that snowy day years ago. After high school, I never accepted Aaron's pursuit. I was reckless by nature, hating anything that tied me down, including love. Right after graduation, I decided to trek Mount Pan alone, signing a liability waiver with a travel agency before embarking on what I thought was just another adventure. But Aaron had followed me without my knowledge. You've lost your mind, haven't you? I had yelled at him. This is the kind of thing that could get you killed. Aaron only held my hand gently and said, if you're not afraid, then I'm not afraid either. I was the one who jinxed us. Halfway through the climb, the mountain was hit by a snowstorm. The metal chains along the trail were slick with ice, and I nearly slipped to my death. Aaron held on to me with all his strength, his entire body frozen as he braced himself against the snow. For nearly 2 hours, he didn't move, afraid that even the slightest shift would cause him to lose his grip on me. By the time rescuers arrived, his hands were completely numb. I later learned he had strained them so badly that he couldn't move his fingers properly for weeks. When we got home, I finally agreed to be his girlfriend. From that day forward, I gave up my adventurous lifestyle. Aaron once joked that I'd grown timid, but I never told him the truth. It wasn't fear of the unknown that changed me. I just couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But love itself is the ultimate adventure. 10 years ago, Aaron had dived into it headfirst without hesitation. 10 years later, I was the one left behind. The memories flooded over me, threatening to tear down the calm facade I'd worked so hard to maintain. I closed my eyes, digging my nails into my palms to steady myself. Whether we loved each other or not doesn't matter anymore, I said, forcing a lightness into my voice. Aaron, we're adults. Breaking up shouldn't feel like the end of the world, should it? The corner of my mouth lifted into a smile even I didn't understand. All I knew was that the man in front of me was no longer the boy who had once stood by me so steadfastly in college. Aaron refused to accept the breakup, but it didn't matter. Starting a relationship takes 2 people, but ending one only requires one. I moved into an apartment as far away as possible from what had once been our wedding home. My plan was to wait until our joint projects were completed before formally announcing the end of our relationship in the most dignified way possible. In my youth, Aaron had been unbeatable in my heart. Even now, I couldn't bring myself to expose the ugly truth to the world, to turn him into a public disgrace. But reality doesn't care about plans. During a final meeting with a client to close a deal, Zoe appeared. She arrived before Aaron, her entrance drawing the attention of everyone present. Her dress hugged her figure, showcasing the curves of her youthful body. She moved gracefully between the tables, her smile charming and coy, raising her glass as she flitted from one guest to the next. It was clear she was there to win them over, and she played her role perfectly. I frowned. Zoe suddenly showing up in front of our business partners was clearly a move to flaunt her presence and assert her status. But this wasn't a party. It was a negotiation table. Her behavior only made her look like a pawn for amusement. During the dinner, one of the business partners put his arm around Zoe's waist. She froze, not realizing what was happening until she leaned back slightly, causing wine to spill down her chest. The white silk of her dress turned translucent where it soaked through, clinging to her skin. The partner smirked and pulled her onto his lap. Mr. Ma, I began, rising to my feet. But before I could say more, the door to the private room swung open. Aaron stormed in, his face dark with fury. He didn't hesitate. 2 punches landed squarely on Mr. Ma's face. Aaron! Zoe cried, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her face. Aaron shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders as she collapsed against his chest. She trembled uncontrollably as he picked her up. Her arms instinctively circled his neck, a move so practiced it felt second nature. As he carried her past me, Aaron paused. He looked at me, his expression icy and filled with disappointment. Aaron, he said, his voice low, even if you hate me, you shouldn't stoop to such tactics to humiliate her. You shouldn't hurt her. The fragile stitches holding my composure together tore apart, leaving my heart exposed to the cold wind. The boy who once stood up for me against an entire auditorium, declaring his unwavering belief in me, seemed long gone. Aaron left, carrying Zoe in his arms. The rest of the room's eyes shifted to me. To them, I was still Aaron's fiancée. I raised my glass, forcing a smile. Sorry for the scene, I said, and downed the liquor in one go. The burning sensation seared my throat and lungs, making my head spin. It wasn't until then that I remembered I hadn't had a drink in years. But maybe this was for the best. It was time to become the Lynn Aaron I was before Aaron ever came into my life. The next day, a 10-year-old post about Aaron and me resurfaced on our old university forum. Familiar usernames popped up in the comments, reigniting long-dormant discussions. Photos of Aaron carrying Zoe went viral almost immediately, alongside news of him assaulting a business partner and causing a project to fall apart. The dignified exit I had envisioned for myself? Ruined. My phone rang nonstop. Calls from Grace. My parents. Aaron's parents. I ignored them all, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window in my apartment. I lit a cigarette. The first drag was acrid, burning my throat and making my chest ache. I had given up smoking years ago. Now I wondered why I ever thought quitting was a good idea. Scrolling through the comments on the forum, I found myself laughing bitterly. I'll never believe in love again. How could my top campus couple end like this? 10 years. A whole 10 years. Aaron, and you ruined it all. They say men's love fades over time, while women's love grows. I didn't believe it before. But even Aaron couldn't resist a mistress. Wait, that girl looks familiar. Isn't she the one Aaron used to post about? The student she sponsored during college? Someone dug up Zoe's background. Unbelievable. It's like one of those farmer and the snake stories. Aaron helped her, only for Zoe to climb into her benefactor's bed. Honestly, I always thought there was something between them at work. But Aaron was so dazzling, top tier in every way. Who would have thought Aaron would get bored of gourmet meals and settle for garbage instead? Dogs eating garbage. It's in their nature. What's the point of love? Anyway, he cheated. After all, trash men should just disappear. Overnight, the forum thread gained more than 10,000 comments. On social media, the scandal surrounding Aaron's affair continued to dominate trending topics. Everyone speculated whether the Lynn and Aaron families would turn against each other over this. Then, Aaron posted a tweet. Lynn Aaron is my one true love. Forever. Our engagement remains intact. Don't believe or spread rumors. My finger hovered over the screen, typing and deleting my response multiple times before finally giving up. Instead, I pulled out the guest list from our engagement party. It was a painstakingly handwritten document that had taken me an entire week to perfect. Any mistake required rewriting the whole page because it was so important to me. Now, I realized how convenient digital invitations were. Being a socialite, especially one engaged to a family of equal status, wasn't easy. Even ending a relationship required a public statement. Wearing the wedding dress I had chosen myself, I stood on the stage. When I announced the annulment of our engagement, the crowd's faces changed dramatically. Because of Aaron's tweet, they had assumed Zoe's involvement was just another insignificant affair. No different from the tabloid-worthy scandals common in elite circles. They thought I had gathered them here, alongside reporters, to clarify the misunderstanding. Camera flashes blinded me, but thanks to rehearsals, I didn't flinch. I removed the ring Aaron had placed on my finger and set it down. Then, I shed the wedding gown, cut off my intricately styled hair, and said, "From now on, when you mention me, don't associate my name with Aaron. I am no longer his fiancée. I am Lynn Aaron. Not the Lynn of Lynn and Aaron, but Lynn of myself." When I got home, the house was filled with the acrid smell of smoke. Aaron was sitting on the couch, the ashtray on the coffee table overflowing with cigarette butts. "Zoe's emotional wounds have healed, so now you've come running back here?" I asked flatly. Breaking into someone's home without permission is trespassing. You know, I could press charges. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Aaron, why are you being so ruthless? What was I to you these past 10 years? Just something to be discarded like trash." I sighed and opened the curtains, letting light flood the room. "Aaron," I said calmly, "you of all people know how long 10 years is. So why was it so easy for you to give your love to someone else?" I turned to him, my voice steady. "I've always wanted to ask, what was it like, those 4 years I was abroad? Keeping in touch with me while sneaking around with her? Did it feel good? Was it fun? Making a fool of me while I unknowingly wished you both happiness?" Thinking about it now, it felt like watching a puppet show from the audience, where I was the puppet all along. "Aaron, please don't go. Don't leave me," Aaron pleaded. "We can still have a future together." His words, once capable of stirring my heart, now left me unmoved. The waves of love I had once felt for him had turned into a stagnant, lifeless pool. "I'm done, Aaron," I said simply. After the official breakup, I poured all my energy into work, traveling for business, managing projects, and keeping myself so busy I had no time to think about anything else. My parents and close friends were worried I was overworking myself, afraid I would burn out. Grace, in particular, bombarded me with dozens of messages daily, and even called at night to remind me to get some sleep. "Check out this guy, Jason Xing," Grace texted. "Top-tier candidate. Super reliable. Aaron, even if you're not ready for a relationship, at least go on a date. Let Aaron know he's ancient history. Did he show up at your office again today?" Grace's voice came through the phone as I scrolled through the latest updates on the forum. Pictures of Aaron kept popping up daily despite my official announcement of our breakup. Aaron, however, wasn't ready to let go. Like 10 years ago, when he used to wait outside my classroom after school, he now waited outside my office building every day. He followed me as I walked, tailed my car, and often stayed parked outside my apartment complex all night. He even bought a property less than 100 meters from mine. Because of how frequently we were photographed together, rumors began swirling online that we were rekindling our relationship. Meanwhile, Zoe's situation took a nosedive. She was forcibly fired from Aaron's company amid the backlash of her homewrecker scandal. She was not only relentlessly criticized online, but also blacklisted in her industry. Anonymous users even discovered her address and started leaving funeral wreaths at her door. Grace, my ever-dedicated gossip reporter, kept me updated on all these developments. She spent most of her day online, keeping tabs on the drama involving Aaron and Zoe. Just as I finished reading her latest message, my phone rang again. "Ugh, you're so stubborn," Grace said, exasperated. "You can't let this scumbag ruin your entire life. You're not going to stay single forever because of him, are you?" I rubbed my temples. "Maybe you should worry about yourself for a change," I replied dryly. She let out a mischievous laugh. "Just wait. You'll see." I didn't understand what she meant until I finished work and stepped outside. That's when I saw him, Jason Xing. He stood there in a long coat, tall and handsome, just like in the pictures Grace had sent me earlier. As soon as he saw me, he walked over, taking the spot Aaron usually occupied. "Let me drive you home today," he said, his tone casual but confident. Aaron, who had been standing nearby, immediately froze. His face turned ashen, and the crease between his brows deepened. "Aaron, come home with me," Aaron said firmly. I glanced around and noticed a few people pretending to be passersby. Their phones were pointed directly at us. I couldn't help but smile. Without hesitation, I slipped my arm through Jason's. Aaron's face went completely pale. Jason turned to him with a grin. "See you later, ex-husband," he said cheerfully. His hand rested naturally on my shoulder as he led me to his car. Once we were out of Aaron's sight, he let go, albeit reluctantly. By the time we reached my apartment, the internet was already buzzing with new photos. The headlines read, Ex versus Current, the Love Triangle Showdown. Grace was ecstatic, flooding me with messages about how great Jason and I looked together. He's 3 years younger, but he's in your league. Plus, you two have so much in common. Both from the same social circle. Both just back from studying abroad. You'd make a perfect match. She gushed. I rolled my eyes and replied, do you think I'm breeding livestock and adjusting genetics here? Jason, sitting next to me, turned his head slightly. You could consider me. Though, he said with a teasing smile. When I added him on social media, I received a message confirming a $5,000 transfer. Payment for what he jokingly called today's performance fee. I knew Grace just wanted me to move on, to leave Aaron behind and start fresh with someone new. But I wasn't as fragile as she thought. Aaron could love fiercely and let go just as decisively. After Jason's appearance, Aaron seemed to back off for a while. I thought our story had finally come to an end, that I was free of any lingering ties. I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. But the calm didn't last. A new trending topic disrupted the fragile peace. A group of adventurers posted a video online. It showed a man braving a heavy snowstorm, trudging uphill against all advice. His steps were labored, and he seemed determined to keep going despite the dangerous conditions. Someone recognized him. It was Aaron. The timestamp on the video matched his last social media post. Aaron's Aaron. Wishing for one more year with her. The adventurers explained that Aaron had insisted on climbing the mountain, but failed to return at the designated time. After searching for an entire day, rescue teams still hadn't found him. The internet erupted. Once again, Zoe and I were dragged into the narrative. Comments speculated endlessly about who her referred to. The eternal white moonlight, or just an occasional fleeting obsession? Zoe's not even a decent substitute for red string fate. How laughable. Aaron left decisively. Looks like Zoe was abandoned, too. The public discourse was relentless, dissecting every detail of our lives. People on the forums were relentless. Do they really think they can get married without being equals? Sleeping together a few times doesn't mean you can climb the social ladder. Someone even posted a photo of Zoe looking pale and haggard. The caption said it was taken in her hometown. After Aaron's affair was exposed, Zoe was immediately fired from the company. The scandal had spiraled out of control, turning her into a pariah. She was afraid to go out, terrified of being attacked. With no other options, she returned to her hometown. But the internet's reach knows no bounds. And even her village wasn't free of young people who knew the story. The tale of Zoe betraying her benefactor and stealing her sponsor's fiancé spread like wildfire. Everyone called her an ingrate. Her younger brother, now at the age to marry, became the center of her family's attention. Their patriarchal grandfather, as traditional as ever, began seeking older men willing to pay a high bride price for Zoe, so he could use the money to fund her brother's wedding. Zoe called me, crying. Aaron, she sobbed. I was wrong. Please, help me one more time. I held the phone to my ear, listening to her desperate pleas. After a long silence, I finally said, You've really let me down. 8 years. Zoe, 8 years. And you still don't know how to save yourself. I paused, considering my next words. Maybe this is just your fate. On the 4th day of the search, the rescue team found Aaron. The iron chains were slippery, and he had no climbing companions. He fell into a ravine. The thick snow cushioned his fall, saving his life. But the ordeal left permanent scars. Surviving 5 days in sub-zero temperatures caused irreparable damage to his body. His leg, which hit a rock during the fall, was never properly treated. He would never walk normally again. After being rescued, the first thing Aaron did was call me. His voice, hoarse and broken, sounded like that of an old man on his deathbed. Aaron, he rasped. You'll never forgive me, will you? I didn't respond. Please, he pleaded. Just talk to me. Aaron, I miss you so much. I looked out the window. Somewhere, fireworks were lighting up the night sky. The bursts of dazzling light faded quickly, leaving only darkness. much like the brilliance of my past with Aaron and the countless futures I once imagined with him. The night sky grew black again after the fireworks vanished. But in just a few hours, the sun would rise, and daylight would return. No one's life depends on someone else. The world keeps spinning, no matter who's missing from it. Aaron, I said softly, this is my answer. He didn't speak again. The silence stretched so long that I nearly forgot we were still on the call. Finally, he whispered one word. Okay. A few soft beeps signaled the end of the call. At the same time, my fingers pressed the keyboard, typing the final period on a project report. A report that closed both a chapter of work and the last 10 years of my life with Aaron.